Okay, we are going to start our meeting this now. So we're going to call our meeting to order. And Cleric, would you take the roll call, please?
Yes. Member Church is not here. Member Liebolt?
Here.
Member McGuire?
Here.
Member Minor is not here. Member Nickel? Here. And Chair Bergman?
Here.
Great. We have a quorum.
We have a quorum. Great. I'm so pleased we have a quorum this evening. Okay, our first item for business tonight is to take a look at last month's minutes. Has everybody had a chance to take a look at them?
Yes.
Any changes?
No.
Chair
No
Berg,
changes?
the one thing I want to note was just at the beginning where we were referred to as the Historic Preservation Commission Board of Appeals.
We will make that edit. I'm not sure why that is in there.
We're not quite the Board of Appeals.
No.
So,
So.
Thank you
other
for
than
that.
okay. We're just the Historic Preservation Commission.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so with that change in mind, can I have a motion to accept the minutes?
I move to accept the minutes.
I'll second.
Okay, voice vote, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any objections? We have our minutes. Okay, and then for all of our meetings, we always ask if there are any non-agenda items or any visitors who would like to talk to us about non-agenda items. Do we have anybody on the Zoom call?
We don't have any members of the public, just staff.
That's too bad. Okay. Well, good. So then we can move on from there. And then item number 4 is the historic landmark nomination for 331 Witchwood Lane.
Yes.
And that is Andrew and Carrie Bankowski. Now, this is a hearing.
So it's a, yes, it's a hearing.
Okay. And then the 125 Center is a hearing also.
Correct.
Right? So should I swear everybody now at this point?
That's a good question. Is that what we've done in the past for
Yeah.
these then? Yes.
Okay. So anybody who is going to give testimony or speak this evening, would you please stand and raise your right hand to be sworn for the public meeting? So, for all of the testimony you're to give this evening, it will be true and honest and faithful to the best of your knowledge? Yes. Then you are sworn. Thank you. Okay. So, Clara, why don't you start us off and tell us a little bit about the house at 331 Witchwood Lane?
Yeah, absolutely. So we received an application to designate this home on October 23rd. In our past document that we had done looking at the different historic properties in town, the survey, it was named the Frank A. Ross House, located at 331 East Witchwood Lane, and it was submitted by the property owners, Andrew and Carrie Bienkowski. And this single-family residence, which is the Tudor Revival style, was originally constructed in 1929 by noted architect L.G. Hallberg, who designed commercial, industrial, and residential buildings in the Chicago area. And it was constructed for Frank A. Ross, an executive with the Stewart Warner Company, which manufactured auto parts. And Paul, if you want to go into some of the architecture of that, just one other thing of note is that this property, or this building, the home, was one of 24 previously identified by the HPC as representing the highest priorities for preservation in the village.
Great, thank you, Clara. I will point out, just to get started, that it was identified as being a highly significant house by the team that did the historic surveys now several years ago. And Susan Benjamin is here with us this evening, who wrote up the reviews at that time. So I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about the house and essentially be the voice of the house. The Ross Benkowski House, as I am calling it this evening, was designed in 1929. It was designed by a well-known architect, but who is now faded from our popular architectural history. Lawrence Gustav Hallberg designed many fine commercial and industrial buildings as well as houses, primarily for the Swedish community in Chicago. And he built this remarkably detailed house for Frank Ross, who was an executive with the Stewart Warner Company, a manufacturer of gauges, testing equipment, and pressure tanks. One of the things that's interesting when you read Ross's obituary is to see that Ross, being an executive with the Stewart Warner Company, also hired Hallberg to build all of their factory buildings in downtown Chicago. So this is the house. This is how you perceive the house from the driveway. This is essentially the street elevation of the house. It's a house that I've looked at for years and years and years and knew that it was a nice house, but I didn't have any sense that it had the kind of exciting details in it that I'm going to show you in just a minute. It has all of those mortise and tenon joints and the exposed beams, and it's just a very remarkable house.
Would you like me to go to the next?
Number 2, please. So I took a page out of the McAllister book on architecture, and because I want to show you that this house that we're going to look at is pretty much a textbook Tudor-style house. And I've given almost everybody, I think I've given a McAllister book to everybody on our group here. So I want to just real quickly go through this, but we're going to see a little porch like you see up here on the top row. We're going to see big bay windows, 2-story bay windows. We're going to see upper bay windows. We're going to see ribbon windows, more ribbon windows. We're going to see an open air porch. We're going to see gable ends. We're going to see more of these big bow windows. We're going to see a developed entranceway. I'm just clicking down all of the items that McAllister points out. We're going to see big monumental chimneys, and then we're going to see these marvelous strapwork pieces also. So there's all of these wonderful things that we're going to see that are all part of this. Let's go to the next slide.
Yep.
Okay. So we start out standing in the driveway. This is the street view of it. This is a bay window that is over the garages, and this is just a tremendous bay. If we start by looking at the bottom, we're going to analyze this from the bottom up. If you look at the development of the skirting on the bottom of this bay window, you can see all of the horizontal joint work covering up the way the skirting is put together. That is all Tudor in style. These windows here are all very small paned casement windows. The small panes are part of the Tudor and Gothic era when glassmaking wasn't advanced enough to make large panes of glass. So you get these small panes, which puts it into the Tudor environment. Then you see the Celestry windows up here, which is another attempt to have a lot more light enter into the house. Then you can see this wonderful cornice that overhangs this whole bay window, which gives it this whole Tudor ensemble effect. The other thing we're going to see throughout the house is all of these exposed beams all have, down at the bottoms, you'll see these little buttons that stick out. Mm-hmm. These beams, the vertical beams, are mortised and tenoned into the horizontal beams, and those pins that you see are the wooden pins that actually hold the joints together. This is pre-industrial style construction work, and to have this done on this house in 1929 is just a wonderful example of some very fine craftsmanship.
Yep.
So here we get to the front door, and there's just all sorts of fireworks going on here. The first thing we're going to see is that this whole thing is this beautiful little porch that's on the front of the house. And the porch has got wonderful beams. You can see the tenon buttons in there. You can see this beautiful plaster strap work. This is called strap work, but it comes on this house in the form of panels. And you can see just the wonderful exuberance of all of the design detail, all of the floral arrangements that are in there. The next piece I want you to see are these king pins and the little pendant drop knob. There's a pendant drop over here and one over here. These are all elements that keep this right in the Tudor moment. The next thing I want you to notice are these two curved beams that are here. This is a salute, if you will, to ancient construction forms, when before they were able to develop timbers, tree trunks into lumber, they would take tree trunks and lean them up against each other to form the early style buildings. These beams are actually called crux, and that's to show that it's visually possible that this building would have been built before the year 1000. And then finally, I want you to notice all of this beautiful brick lagging, where they take the bricks and they're all stacked in on a horizontal basis. That is part of the crucking process. You put the crux in, and then you fill in the spaces. And you do that in the most efficient way by lagging the bricks. Then last, we're going to take a look at all of the shingle work that's up here. Most of you know that I'm in a Master's of Architectural Preservation program. I was in Boston in August studying traditional building techniques, and we actually had part of our seminar was on shingle roofs. And there's an awful lot of firepower going on with all of the shingles. I want you to look at the nubbiness of that. So next slide, please. Okay, so you can see my partner in slate is already commenting on this. So this slate roof is just a dynamo. The slate roof is graduated. And graduated means that the slates down here are thicker and have more reveal than the slates up at the top of the roof. The slates up here are very small, and the ones down here are very large. And that process of the shingles getting smaller and smaller as you go up to the peak of the roof is called graduation. The slates are textured. That means that the edges of the slates are all weathered off. You can see that the edges are rounded here. And then the other thing that happens is that the corners are cracked off. So you can see right there, that looks like the roof is disintegrating. That's actually done on purpose. The slater does this technique. Here you can see a really good example. The slater does this to give the roof that instant aging effect. And you can tell that that's not a broken shingle because there's never a joint underneath where the slates have been cracked off. So the point of giving that extra nubbiness is always done in a way that the roof doesn't leak. We're going to see slightly on one of the later slides, the shingles, the slates on this roof are dark gray, blue, and green, and also red. And to mix all four colors, especially red slates, is a very expensive process. There's only one slate yard in the country in Pennsylvania that produces red slate. So that is another part of this. And then finally, the last point is that the slates are called what is called developed. And here you can see the slates are different widths. So here you have some slates that are 12 and 14 and 16 inches wide, and then other slates that are only 8 inches wide. And there again, this is part of the slater's technique of creating a slate roof where the slates are wider and narrower. As the slater is going up the roof, he has to get all of the joints offset, otherwise the roof is going to leak. And so the part of the technique or part of the art of what he's doing is getting all of this to come together so that it doesn't leak. So you you didn't know you were going to have this nerdy a lecture tonight, but I hope you're enjoying all of this. So next view. So here we are at the rear facade, and here we're going to see more textbook examples of Tudor architectural style. The first thing I want you to look at is this open porch. This is an emblem of Tudor architecture where you have an open but covered porch on the house. And I want to thank the owners for not glazing that porch in. So many people glaze that, and it doesn't work because it's not designed to be glazed, and it always looks terrible when it's done. But you can see the lovely columns and then the brackets that are here, all designed to hold all of this up. The next piece I want you to look at is this stone column, stone pier here. This is what's called irregular tabbing, in that all of the stones are different sizes and different shapes. The stones protrude into the brickwork in an irregular basis, and this is done to add to point out the charm of the Tudor architectural style. Then as we look on the east facade, you can see there's another one of these wonderful strapping panels. Then we're going to come and look on this end of the house, and you see these two beautiful gables that are sticking out. These protrude from the house. These are part of an overhang, which is very much part of the Tudor style. So they are overhanging. I want you to see there are ribbon windows here of casement windows. There's a ribbon, there's a ribbon. That is window after window after window all together in a band. Then the next thing I want you to see is this little downspout box that's there. That's actually a drainage device. When I came over and took these photographs, Mr. Benkowski was out raking leaves. It was a beautiful fall day. And when the leaf, you can see that the gutters are full of leaves. At that time of year, you want that box there because when it rains, the leaves and the water go in there, and that box makes the water swirl. It stops, it makes the water start to swirl, and that drives the leaves and all of the acorns and the junk down the downspout and keeps it from clogging up. So there's a real purpose for that other than it just being artistic. So next slide. So here's a close-up of just one of the gables, and again, we're going to look at some fun things here. So here we've got our little pendant drop on the king post, and more pendant. There's a pendant in there, I think. You get a nice view of the drain box. Here are the ribbon windows. Here we see the crucked beams. You can see the brick lagging that's in there on the diagonal. You can see all the lagging that goes on here up in the gable face. This gable protrudes from the building, and here you can see all of these lovely little brackets that are holding this up. So this is all part of the architectural components, all part of the architectural design of building this in a Tudor style. Lastly, we're going to go up and take a look at the roof again. Look at all of the nubbiness on that roof. You know, when you first look at that, you say, oh my gosh, that roof is about to fall apart. It's not. It's designed to look that old. That roof looks like it's 400 years old. Here you can see they've chipped off the shingles and broken them up a little bit. Here's another one where they've clipped off the edges and stuff. This is all part of designing this lovely building. Next slide. So this is the last slide. I wanted to show you this lovely strap medallion that's on the side of the house. It would be nice to spend some time and try and understand the iconography and see if that panel is actually has a message to it. But you can see the beautiful brickwork and all of the lovely exposed timbers in the house. So I wanted to speak on behalf of the house, and I want to thank Mr. Benkowski for bringing it forward and proposing it for us. So that's my presentation. Mr. Benkowski, do you have anything that you'd like to say about the house? Would you?
Well, I guess I would just say, had I known you were
Actually,
going to...
Blake, step up to the podium, please. Yeah.
I don't have really any presentation on the house. I guess the first thing that I would say is, had I known that the pictures were going to be, or you were going to come that day and take pictures, I would have tried to rake the leaves out.
I felt guilty about not going home and getting my blower and coming home. He had leaves 2 feet deep in his yard. It was that day.
He caught
that
me
was-
in the worst possible moment where it looked impossible I would ever get through it. And I can see all kinds of things that I need to go and do on the house, so it's also quite helpful that you shared that.
I didn't mean to do that to you, but,
No, I would, I guess 2 other things I would just add. One is we have the original blueprints for the house. We have all of them, so we've got a roll that's about that
oh my.
big around and by that long. And it's probably 150 sheets of the original
You
blueprints.
have,
And the other thing I'd say is anyone that wants to come by and check out the inside, which I think is a lot cooler than the outside, just let us know.
yeah. You're going to have a,
Digitizing those drawings,
Sorry?
you thought about digitizing those drawings?
Yeah, we have. We need to do that. We've got 2 of them that we framed and just put up in the house, but
Yeah, probably very good.
they are.
I have a whole collection of very fragile drawings, so let me come over and take a look at your drawings. and
Okay.
We can talk, and I can help you get them both digitized and perhaps in a format suitable for framing. So I can give you a great deal of assistance with that. And,
Great, great.
I think it's on a day where we're going to have a whole crowd of us in, because I would, Mr. Benkowski said that he has a 40 by 40 foot great room, living room, that's paneled in walnut. So,
It's that, if you go back 1 or 2 slides, that when you see those 3 big windows across the back there, that's the great room, and that just goes into the house. There's a big fireplace in the middle of it. So that just give you a picture of how that plays out. I would have cleaned up all of this too. I'm just looking at all of the yard furniture and various things I was trying to.
we are not part of the clean house police.
Yeah.
We don't look at things like that.
right,
You'll notice my pointer didn't go anywhere near all of the stuff. I'm looking at all of the cool stuff up there
Well, it
on
could
the
have been
building.
worse. I have teenage kids, and there could have been a party back there with all kinds of terrible things going on. So, thank you, and I learned some things by what you said. So, thanks for sharing.
Well, I could spend another half an hour talking about the house, but everybody will fall asleep if I do that, so.
Any questions from anyone that I can help with? Okay.
Questions? Any thoughts, questions? Okay, great. Yeah.
Just a couple. You've talked at length about the roof. Is that the original roof then from 1928,
829, yeah.
29? Wow. How long do slate roofs like that? I mean, that's beautifully.
Slate roofs in the United States, slate roofs generally last 150 to 200 years. And the problem with the slate roofs is that they degrade from the underneath, which is surprising. The slate begins to powderize itself, and then gets to a point where you can't continue to fix it. You can't continue to slide in slates here and there. So
And are all of the windows original then? The leaded windows and the glass?
Do I really need to?
No, just say yes.
Almost all. There are 1 or 2 that were replaced, but almost everything is original windows. And the roof, we did put in some a snow down in a couple of places, so we had to have the slate taken off and put it back on. And we were told by the slater that did that these were Vermont slate, and they should theoretically last forever. So because they're so thick.
Okay.
They're 1.5 to 2 inches thick, some of them, so they should last forever. But I guess we'll find out.
Do you have a basement?
Yes, there's a basement as well. The entire footprint of the house is, it's not a very tall one, it's maybe 9 feet, 9 foot, so it's not what you do today if you were building that house, but it's functional.
No.
It's,
Is it made of stone?
sorry?
Is it made of stone?
Partially stone and then concrete.
Mhm.
The attic is built out?
Sorry?
Is the attic built out?
Yes, that top window there is, it's actually a bedroom.
Oh,
And it's been opened up and turned into an open space with beams. It's more or less for the teenagers to go hang out. That's the idea.
Yeah, that's great.
Great. Great. Well, it's a splendid house.
Could I ask another question?
Yes.
It's such a beautifully preserved home, and you've obviously done so much work to take care of it. When you purchased the home, were you interested in a historically significant home and knew about how to preserve that? Because you certainly have done a lot to maintain the integrity.
We could do more. It's a house that could always use some more attention. I would say that we moved here from Europe, where we've spent I'd lived in Europe for 25 years before coming here. And I never lived in a house that was younger than 200 years old.
Oh, okay.
So I'm used to living with beams and stone and
Sure.
things that don't always work quite right. Weird noises in the night. And I quite like it. My wife does as well.
Good. Well, you've served the home well.
Well, neat. Any other comments? Okay. So we have a criteria for designation that we need to go through. So we're going to go through and try and work out some specific findings of what we like and what we think is important about the house. On about the last page of your packet, there's a criteria for designation. It's 9-14-15 criteria for designation. Okay, so we have a whole series of questions here: general considerations, architectural significance, and historic significance. And there's 7 questions for each one of these groups, and we're going to go through and talk about them and see which one of these we think might apply to this house. That will help guide us in making our decision as to whether we want to landmark the house. So, starting with general considerations, the feature, the house, has significant character, interest, or value as part of the historic, aesthetic, cultural, or architectural characteristics of the village, state of Illinois, or United States. So we think it has significant character and interest or value.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes? Okay. Number 2, the feature is closely identified with a person or persons who significantly contributed to the development of the village, the state of Illinois, or the United States. So this goes to the social history of the property. We've got Frank Ross, who was an executive at Stewart Warner, built the house. I was able to develop some of that information that was in your package. We found his obituary. It appears that his wife was very active in Lake Bluff affairs. Although Arden Shore is gone, she was on the board at Arden Shore and did a lot of fundraising for that. And then there were other people who had been in the house over time. The Davis family was there for many years. It ran United Educators, which is Tangley Oaks.
Oh, okay.
So how do we feel about the feature is closely identified with the persons or persons who contributed to the development of the village?
Yes.
Do we
That's
think
a
that
yes.
applies?
Yes. I do.
Yep. No, okay. The feature involves a notable efforts is, or the only known example of work by a master builder, designer, architect, architectural firm, whose individual accomplishments has influenced the development of the village, the state of Illinois, or the United States. So do we think that Gustav Hallberg is a notable master builder, designer, or architect?
Yes.
Number 4, the unique location or singular characteristics of the house make it an established or familiar visual feature. We think it's a,
Yes,
Yeah,
Yes.
okay.
I've driven by for years and admired it.
We're going to wire it a lot more now.
Yeah.
The activities associated with the house make it a current or former focal point of reference in the village. I'm not so sure it's a focal point in the village,
But
but
it'd be unique where, on that street.
It
Is that
is.
what you're looking for?
It also doesn't have to meet all of these criteria,
Right.
just so everyone is clear.
yeah. So, do we think it's a focal point or reference in the village? I'm not so sure. Okay.
We can-
The feature is a type or is associated with a use once common but now rare, or is a particularly fine or unique example of a utilitarian house and possesses a high level of integrity or architectural significance.
Yes.
I think the thing we like about it is that it has a fabulous level of integrity.
Absolutely.
So, the feature is likely to yield, has yielded or is likely to yield historically significant information or even prehistoric data. I'm not sure that,
We might have to dig in the yard for the
yeah,
trees.
so, I'm not so sure that one applies. I have found Indian arrowheads in a friend's backyard when we
Really?
were playing as a kid, so sometimes the answer to that question is yes. So, okay, now we move to architectural significance. Here we have a group of questions. The feature represents certain distinguishing characteristics of architecture inherently valuable for the study of a time period, type of property, method of construction, or use of indigenous materials. So
Yes.
do we think that yes? Okay.
That's a yes.
The feature, the house embodies elements of design, detail, material, or craftsmanship of exceptional quality.
That's yes.
That's a simple one. The house exemplifies a particular architectural style in terms of detail and material.
Yes.
Yes. The house is one of the few remaining examples of a particular architectural style and has undergone little or no alteration since its original construction.
Yep.
Yep. Okay. The feature is or part of a contiguous grouping that has a sense of cohesiveness expressed through a similarity of style, characteristics, time period, type of property, method of construction or use, and accents. So do we think this is part of a contiguous grouping or has a sense of cohesiveness to the neighborhood? I think most of the houses on that street are of a different styles and types.
Eclectic.
Okay. All right. The detail, material, and workmanship of the feature can be valued in and of themselves as reflective or similar to those of a majority of other visual elements in the area. So the detail, material, and workmanship of the feature can be valued in and of themselves.
Yep.
Okay. The landscape is significant in its own right as a work of landscape architecture and is not merely complementary to the structure. There's a rather nice little garden element in the backyard, but I don't know
I
that,
didn't really pay attention to landscaping, I
Okay.
apologize.
I don't think that necessarily applies, but,
Right.
I don't know either.
all right. Moving on to historic significance. The house is an exceptional example of a historic or vernacular style. Yes, yes.
Yes.
The feature has a strong association with the life or activities of a person or persons who significantly contributed to or participated in the historic or cultural events of the United States, state of Illinois, or village. So this we look back again at the residents, the people who built the house and have lived in the house. So do we think there's a strong association there for participating in the historic or cultural events?
I would say yes. We kind
I
of
would say
answered that.
yes.
Okay, some of these questions are kind of repetitive, but that's okay. Okay, the feature is associated with an organization or group, whether formal or informal, from which persons have significantly contributed to historic or cultural events in the country, the state, or the village. So this looks at whether the house is associated with an organization or group.
Probably not.
Okay, we're going to fall off here pretty quickly. A house is associated with a notable historic event. I don't think Abe Lincoln was there. The features associated with an antiquated use due to technology or social advances.
I
No,
don't think so.
okay. And the last question, the feature is a monument to or cemetery of a historic person or persons. So it's not a graveyard. And at least we don't think there's anybody buried in the backyard. So, all right. So we have quite a few features here that we've said yes to. We've gone down the list, and there are far more yeses than nos. Would we like to landmark this house?
Yeah, I would like to see.
Okay. Would someone make a motion to landmark the house?
And it would be in the form of a recommendation to the village board.
So we would recommend to the village board that we landmark the house. And can I have a motion?
A motion?
So Randy's made the motion. Will someone make a second?
Second.
Okay. And I think we need to have a roll call vote.
Yes. Member Liebelt,
Randy,
All right.
say yes.
Yay.
Member McGuire,
Yes.
Member Nickel,
Yes.
and Chair Bergman.
Yes. Great.
Motion passes.
Thank you. We will make our recommendation to the village board. They have not yet turned us down when we make a recommendation. They will know that this is coming. We will make the recommendation to them. Will that happen in December?
Likely in January,
Likely in January.
and we'll be in touch.
And they do that on 2 meetings. They do a reading,
Yeah, we
first
usually
reading,
do
and second
first reading
reading.
and second reading,
So
correct?
by February, your house will be landmarked. And as part of the documentation for that will be all of the questions that we've answered yes to as part of that. These are all things that we see that are part of the historic significance of your property. So, Mr. Nikowski, I would like to thank you.
Beautiful home.
Yeah,
These are in.
good. And I will be in touch with you to come and talk to you about the house and the drawings and whatnot.
This is.
And a tour.
All right, so, thank you.
Yes, congratulations.
You
That's
have
so
two
sick.
sets, but you can look at it when we're looking. I just wanted to hold on to this.
Okay. All right, so moving on to the next house.
A long time ago.
We have the house at 125 Center. And this is Jim and Krista Hugel. And Jim Hugel is here this evening. Good, thank you for coming.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.
So I see we have a number of people here ready to speak and talk to us about the house. So, can I ask both of you to introduce yourselves, please? Jean?
I'm Jean Sylvester. I work with Susan at Benjamin Historic Certifications.
And Susan?
Susan Benjamin, and we have a business that we have the pleasure of doing landmark nominations and doing research on these great houses.
Good. Do you have a presentation you want to tell us about the house? Tell us about James and Mary?
Yes, so this is the James and Mary Marilla Hobbs residence located at 125 East Center, just literally across the street from Village Hall. The actual date of construction hasn't been exactly determined, but based on a newspaper article, we believe that it is likely that it was built around 1889, which is a little bit earlier than I think was the estimate before.
Oh, that's neat.
Next slide, please.
Yep.
So we felt that this house met 2 criteria, but based on your conversation about the house on Witchwood, it likely will meet the criteria for others. This is a shot of the north and west facades, which you will see have really remarkable integrity. In terms of changes, there have been additions in the rear, and the porch has been modified, but the existing porch is very similar to what was on the house, probably originally, and what was documented in a historic photograph we found from 1928. Next slide, please. So we felt that the house is worthy of landmarking because it's an excellent example of a simplified Queen Anne house, and also its close associations with James Hobbs and his wife, Mary Marilla. The really exciting thing about this house is that this house really represents the earliest days of Lake Bluff, even before it was called Lake Bluff. And the involvement of this couple in every facet of this village was really amazing and just replete. James was born in May. He met his wife there, and they married there. They moved to Chicago in 1856. He became very successful as the owner of a produce commission business. He was a member of the Board of Trade for decades and president. He organized a bank, and a couple banks actually, and then moved to the insurance and real estate business, where he became even more successful. He was involved in land speculation not only in the Lake Bluff area, but also in Waukegan. They lived in Chicago, but they kept a summer home here in Lake Bluff, and this is the house that was their summer home. Mary Marilla came from a religious family, and James converted to Methodism. Is that right, Methodism? And they became members of the Grace Methodist Episcopal Church in Chicago at its formation, and then really became very involved and were pillars of the community. Both of their obituaries detail how involved they were and how generous they were to various social organizations within the church. They were both also very involved in Prohibition. James politically was involved with the Prohibition Party and was a candidate for governor of Illinois under that party, and Mary was very involved in the Women's Christian Temperance Union. James was also a trustee at Northwestern and paid for the construction of the Dearborn Observatory, which was built when the telescope that had been at the University of Chicago was moved up to Evanston when the old University of Chicago was closed. He died in Maine in 1914. Next slide, please. And then here is Mary. We were very excited to find that photograph that was given to us by the archives at the Women Christian Temperance Union, and we shared that with the Historical Society. So they had 4 children. Mary was as active as James, and one of the most exciting things we found during researching this house was her role in Chicago, and then again up in Lake Bluff. I think she's been sort of overlooked in history, perhaps, and she really was an unbelievable force. She was first vice president of the Board of Trustees of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, which was a very powerful organization. She was a lifelong supporter of women and children. Very interestingly, she was chairman of the committee which established police matron work, which meant before these women changed this, women prisoners were overseen by male guards, whatever, and so they instituted the practice of having women oversee these prisoners, which was really a landmark change. This women's land syndicate in Waukegan was a financial investment by the Hobbs, but it offered reduced rates for women to buy homes in Waukegan, and of course it was alcohol-free, and there were other social entities and restrictions involved in that to sort of make kind of an idyllic, safe haven for women in Waukegan. And they did all of this work in Chicago. And then next slide, please. you'll see that they did even more work in Lake Bluff. So this was another photograph we were super excited to find, which is probably the youngest, a picture of them at their youngest, likely when they were married, around 1860. Next slide, please. So they were friends with the sort of founding fathers of the Methodist Church in Chicago, and they were part of the group that wanted to establish a resort-type area, and that's what the Lake Bluff Camp Meeting Association became. So they were involved at the very, very beginning, and they were extensively involved. They donated buildings, they purchased real estate on behalf of the Camp Meeting Association, which then they ultimately donated that to the village. Hobbs had his real estate office in the village hall. They substantially expanded the property owned by the Camp Meeting Association, and after it was donated to the village of Lake Bluff, those 3 additions were really a major increase in the area of the village. And then, you know, random things. James Hobbs was responsible for building the tabernacle for the association. They built the Hotel Irving. He added streetlights, and then, of course, he built the artesian well on Center Avenue right across the street, which provided water and then made the lake. He donated property to build the country club, and also donated property and paid for funds to build the Grace Church in the village. Here's some photographs of the tabernacle and the lake and the hotel. Next slide, please.
He's a pretty busy guy, right?
Unbelievable. And she was
She
with
was
him
too.
every step of the way. So where she may have founded an organization, he was listed as president. So for whatever reason, they really were hand in hand with everything. And so we also felt that this house merits landmarking because it is an excellent example of one of the earliest houses really that's been associated with the Camp Meeting Association and the founding of the village.
And architecturally, it's pretty interesting, too. It is very much a part of the scale and fabric of Lake Bluff. And many of the houses were Queen Anne. There were a lot of little cottages, and the ones that were maybe just a tad more important occupied a larger footprint. When you talk about Queen Anne architecture, there's no definition per se, really. And the Queen Anne style doesn't even refer to the Queen Anne period. I don't know, some architectural historian in heaven was making the rules and apparently decided that these homes were to be called Queen Anne. But they contain a whole variety of different details, and unlike the Tudor revival, where there's a pretty defined basket of stylistic elements, there's almost an infinite supply of elements that can be used to define Queen Anne architecture. So I was looking to see, well, what would, online to see what would be a house that was somewhat comparable, but, still a little different. Some had bays, some had these jerkin head clipped off gable roofs, some had off-center entrances, rarely were they located in the center of the home. What they have in common are a picturesque demeanor and an irregular footprint, so that unlike a colonial house, which is totally predictable, there is a whole variety of building elements that define what we have come to call a Queen Anne style. Typically, they all have porches, which is very much in keeping with the way of living then, too. You can go sit on the porch and talk to your neighbor, and, life was in the front of the house, whereas, as we all know later, it moved toward the backyard. But during this period of time, it was a very sort of funny wording when he used, but friendly. So that it was very much part of the stylistic texture of Lake Bluff, and maybe a tad more imposing than some of the smaller cottages, but all, simple wood elements and a great variety of elements, be they different types of shingles like here, or the broad porch with different wraparound porch with different kinds of decorative treatments. But it all kind of adds to the character of Lake Bluff, and it's a good example of a Queen Anne home in this community. Do you want to?
Yeah, so
jump
this, this was the article that we felt likely dated the house at 1889, where it says that other cottages were built this year for J.B. Hobbs of Evanston, even though they say he was, if it is the J.B. Hobbs, we believe it is, we did not find any evidence that he lived in Evanston, but he was so active at Northwestern as a trustee in building that, we felt that might have been a reference to that. Also, in this article, which you can't read, it says that he probably donated funds to paint the inside of the tabernacle. So he was all over the newspaper. This is just sort of an interesting clip about all of the cottages that were built then. And this house has colored glass and windows. We don't have an architect for that. We were not able to determine that. But there are a lot of features that you'll see that are historic on the house that fit right in with this description. Next slide, please. So this is the photograph from 1928.
Oh, wow.
The houses are still there. The little buildings in the middle are not, but the house to the right, Charles Truesdale, was,
Truesdale.
Sorry?
Truesdale.
Pardon me, was the first president of the village, and he was the only person on the board who actually lived here year-round. Everyone else lived in the city likely, and then came here for the summer. But I think the location of the houses suggests very strongly that this was his house. We know from Elmer Vliet's book that he and Mary occasionally rented out this house. But they were friends, they were co-workers, heavily involved in the Camp Meeting Association, and the fact that their houses are so close in proximity show the involvement, I think, and the tight relationship. Both houses are obviously still extant, and if you see the next slide, you'll see that the Hobbs house really has not changed on the north and the west elevations. It has that sort of bay that extends after a cut back on the west. That's clearly historic. There were some changes on the east and the south elevation, but none that take away the significance. You'll also see that the porch has been modified a little bit, but it's pretty close to what it was exactly. The skirting is a little bit different. But, and then you see there is a bay window to the left of the porch that has art glass in it, and that does sort of extend from the facade. It's hard to see from this angle, but you'll see it in an interior picture. So the integrity on the exterior of these two elevations in particular is excellent. Next slide, please.
Well, we can just, discuss the kinds of treatments that are Queen Anne, like that corner bay with a polygonal roof, and the roof, and the porch that stretches around. Next. And when you come inside, you are even more aware of the era that the house was built, including the window casings with the corner blocks, and the deep base mold, and the sills those are all, and the 2/2 windows are all very typical features of that era.
And we like the H because it refers to Hobbs and Hugel.
Great.
Next. And the same with the the staircase and the windows. There's just a lot in this house that's very inviting and very characteristic of the era that it was built. Next. And same true of the fireplace and the window adjacent to it that has the same characteristic. a lot of these houses, even think of the homes at Fort Sheridan, which are, kind of contemporary with this. They have window seats and bays and, similar kind of picturesque characteristics. Next.
So-
Your family.
Yeah, so we sort of ended it here. We don't really know what this is a photograph of. It could be the Ladies' Aid Society. It could be workers from the orphanage. We don't really know, but we thought it was, I love the smile on his face. Often in pictures from this time period, people didn't smile because they had to sit still and sort of like freeze an expression, but he's smiling here and she is too. And, they're surrounded by people that they clearly have helped or are were instrumental in their charity work. Again, Mary, I think, I love this because she's like smack dab in the center. He was credited with starting the orphanage. He did not start that orphanage, she started that orphanage. He was president. But she was, we did find information that's in the report that when she dedicated it, she was credited as the founder of it. So we just kind of love this picture that she's sort of surrounded by women that she undoubtedly influenced if she didn't actually, directly help them. And they're there together because they were really a very powerful couple who really were very instrumental in founding Lake Bluff and doing just outstanding charitable work here and in Chicago.
So, Lake Bluff's power couple?
I was just thinking the same thing.
Okay.
They were.
What was Mr. Hobbs's motto?
Earn as much as you can, save as much as you can, and spend as much as you can.
That's the
Give
Give as much as you
Give
can.
as much. Give as much as you can.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
John Wesleyan, the founder of the founder of Methodism, that's his saying.
Oh,
Interesting.
okay. So Hobbs lifted that from,
Yeah.
okay. from
Yeah.
John
It's
Wesley.
vice versa.
Their home in Chicago is extant. It's been modified. The front has a different facade on it now, but you can see sort of around the corners, you can see sort of vestiges
on LaSalle?
of what it was, yeah, on LaSalle Street. And I was going to say something else. After she died, he donated the home, which was very expensive, very, 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 in a beautiful neighborhood. He donated it to the church and then just sort of spent time back at home in Maine. But I think they really did give all they could.
Okay.
They did.
And she seemed to have been a very powerful woman. And you think of the women's rights movement, she's almost 100 years, or at least 50 years ahead of the women's rights movement.
They were both very involved in abolition movements earlier. Then they moved on to women's suffrage and women's rights, and then aid societies, and then temperance. And she was very good friends with Frances Willard and other sort of leaders in that community, which are now known as purely temperance supporters, but they weren't. The movement was really a much broader focus on
Women's
suffrage
rights.
and women's rights and protecting children and much more of a wide social spectrum. And they were right there with all of them.
Very neat. The History Museum thinks that the WTCU organization was actually founded in Lake Bluff, much to the chagrin of the Evanstonians who want to claim it for themselves. But
Interesting.
we have some correspondence at the museum that talks about this particular group of ladies, Frances Willard, Mary Hobbs, and all of the other usual suspects of that group, met at one of the Lake Bluff hotels and agreed to form an organization that has a slightly different name, but within 6 months, that morphs into the WTCU.
Interesting.
And it's on a Saturday night in the summer in Lake Bluff. You can think of a nice, warm, steamy night, and all of the prohibitionists are all meeting there and all having a nice, hot
Well,
evening.
she had a cottage here, so it's completely possible. I wrote to several of the temperance or WCTU organizations, and her name is everywhere throughout their archives here, and then there was one on the East Coast, I forgot where, maybe Smith College, in all of their papers. She's
Okay.
throughout all of them.
Well, good. Well, thank you for your presentation. Questions, thoughts?
I do. So you believe that the Hobbs lived in the home primarily in the summer and then rented it out during the year, or do you have any
No,
documentation? or what?
unfortunately, the directories didn't really, didn't show that. Elmer Vliet's book said that he rented, or they rented this house out, but we don't know when. They definitely maintained their primary residence in Chicago, but I believe that, we believe that this was their residence for the summer. He owned a lot of land. So it was, we looked for the recorder's office to see if we could determine, when he owned this house, and it was virtually impossible because he owned so much property. We think it might have been in the third edition, but we're not really sure. So while it may only be a summer residence for them, the Hotel Irving has been demolished. It's really the only site that's so closely associated with those two.
Well,
It's kind of interesting that it's very common for just so many people that you associate with homes here, whether it's Shaw, or Adler here, well, that's Libertyville, but they all had places in the city,
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah.
So it was.
most everyone.
It was very common, and yet you associate, and I think they thought of their houses as their homes, too.
Well, these were typically summer houses.
Yeah.
And a lot of these cottages weren't, 1889, the cottages weren't heated. And there wasn't any running water in the town. So if it froze up in the wintertime, you needed to be somewhere where there's a lot more civilization, where there was regular coal deliveries and there was some form of running water. Because I imagine in 1889, where's the local coal yard to buy the coal to heat the place? Where's the water going to come from? And if you have the choice of having indoor plumbing in downtown Chicago or having outdoor plumbing here in Lake Bluff, that can be a kind of an easy choice also. Comments, thoughts? Anybody have any questions for about our house? We've had a beautiful presentation here.
Yes,
Very informative.
Great.
thank you.
So, Mr. Hugel, do you have any things you would like to add? Would you like make any comments?
No, I mean, yeah, I just make a quick statement. So I think you asked a similar question with the gentleman that was here earlier of when did I start thinking about this? I think it came to me relatively early on in moving in. So we moved in 2016. I had just thought it was landmark. People kept talking about all the historical status of the home. And then we got to know the neighbors real well next door at 115 at the Truesdale house, and they had that plaque, and I'm like, wish I had one of those, right? Like,
Where's mine?
Get that.
but the real moment for me was actually when we were going through the buying process. So we bought our house in 2016 for $750,000 at that time. There was a lot going on in the house, I think, that took the normal buyer out of the market today that would want to buy that house, and they just saw it, I think, as a lot of upkeep and maintenance. And I think there's a lot of people that came in, developers wanting to buy the house. It's on a double lot. Take the house down, split it up, and try to develop properties and make money on it, right? But for me, it was like, I think there's just the first thing I did with my wife. I have 4 kids. We're out of town. When she was out of town, I went over to the History Museum because I was so interested in the history of the house and who lived there. But it's one of the, it's a second house on the right when you come into town, and I think it really speaks to the character of Lake Bluff. But the big thing for me is that I have 4 children that are growing up in this house. There's been a lot of families that live there, and I want to make it really, really hard for anybody to ever think about knocking down that house. It means a lot to me and my my family. Sorry, I'm getting emotional. I have a real connection with it now that I've lived there. There's just so much interesting and unique things about the house inside. Actually, whenever we have friends over, I bring them down to the basement. It's dungeony, but I want to show them the history of the house, of how all the original, support and the rocks mixed in with concrete are all down there. So I'm like, no, this shows you like this house was built to stay. They don't build them like they used to. And my wife, even there was a tornado or in the area a couple of years ago, and I was like, this is the last house in the street that's falling apart, right? Like, for lack of a better term, it's a brick SHIT house, right? Like it's there. It was built very well, and the previous owners took extremely good care of it. So I'd like it to stay here as long as humanly possible. So going through this seemed like a natural progression for me. My wife's from Lake Bluff, plan on staying in this house forever, so.
Great, great,
Wow.
lovely.
Thank
Lovely. When you talk about having a whole house full of kids, I can add to that. My best friend, Stephen Conley, grew up in that house, and I spent every single day that we weren't playing at my house, we were over at his house. I grew up about a block and a half away from this house, and the Conleys had 4 children, and so it was always a noisy, loud, fun house. Somebody always running up and down the stairs, and somebody always having some sort of child disaster. And it's a great house for kids, so I can support that. So, thank you for your comments. Okay, so do we have any other questions or any other things we want to add, or do we want to get to working on our list here? So we have, once again, our criteria for designation. We want to go through and discuss what we think are the high points of the house, what we think applies to it for the application. And so we have our 3 groups of questions, starting with general considerations. The house has significant character, interest, or value as part of the historic, aesthetic, cultural, or architectural characteristics of the village. So,
Double check.
yes? Okay. The feature is closely identified with a person or persons who significantly contributed to the development of the village.
Yes.
Yes.
That's a pretty simple yes. The feature involves notable efforts of, or is the only known example of work by a master builder, designer. We don't know who the architect was, so I don't know that applies. The unique location or singular physical characteristics of the house make it an established or familiar visual feature. It's the second house when we drive into Lake Bluff.
I always
right?
notice it when I go by.
The activities associated with the feature make it a current or former focal point of reference in the village. I think the Hobbs influence on the town is pretty significant.
Both of
And
them.
So, the feature is of a type or is associated with a use once common but now rare, or is a particularly fine example or unique example of utilitarian features, or possesses a high level of integrity or architectural significance. So it has a high level of integrity and architectural significance. Okay. The feature has yielded or is likely to yield historically significant information or even prehistoric data. So going through this application process has certainly yielded a lot of information about the house.
Yes.
How do we feel about number 7 here? Is it likely to yield historically significant information? I'm not.
Unsure.
Probably not. Okay, we'll put that as a no. Architectural significance. The house represents certain distinguishing characteristics of architecture inherently valuable for the study of a time period.
Yes.
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 The feature embodies elements of design, detail, material, or craftsmanship of exceptional quality.
Yep.
Yes.
That fits. The feature exemplifies a particular architectural style in terms of detail or material. That's a yes. The feature is one of the few remaining examples of a particular architectural style and has undergone little or no alteration.
Well, that
Yeah.
could be.
We agree with that? Even, it's got a big addition on the east side, but the rest of it is in lovely shape. The feature is part of a contiguous grouping or has a sense of cohesiveness expressed through a similarity of style or characteristics. Do we think there's an architectural significance of the setting that it's in?
It's a grouping of two, does that count?
I would include the city hall in that, and this building, or the village hall, and
And across the street?
yeah, I can say yes to that. The detail, material, and workmanship of the house can be valued in and of themselves. Yes. The landscape is significant in its own right as a work of landscape architecture. I'm not so sure about that. Okay. Historic significance. The feature is an exceptional example of a historic or vernacular style and is one of the few remaining in the village. It's probably a yes. The feature has a strong association with the life or activities of a person or persons who significantly contributed to or participated in the historic or cultural events of the United States, Illinois, and the village. That's a yes. That's a simple one. Okay. The feature is associated with an organization or group, whether formal or informal, from which persons have significantly contributed or participated in the historic or cultural events. With the WTCU, I think.
Yes.
And Methodism in general?
Yes, and the orphanage.
Yes. The feature is associated with a notable historic event. And once again, I don't think Abe Lincoln slept there, but you can convince me otherwise.
The TCU, the Temperance Union was kind of a,
But that
I
is-
mean, it wasn't a one-day event, but it was a
Okay.
movement. Okay.
Okay, the feature is associated with an antiquated use due to technical or social advances. I'm not so sure that applies. The feature is a monument to or a cemetery of a historic person or persons. I don't think I don't think the house is a monument to Hobbes. Okay. So there we have it. We have,
Yes.
once again, we have a lot more yeses than we have nos for our 21 questions here. So do we think we want to landmark the house?
Yes.
Okay. Would someone make the motion, please?
I move to recommend the village, well, that we designate the home as a landmark.
Can I get a second?
I second.
A second? And a roll call vote, please?
Member McGuire,
Yes.
Member Nickel,
Yes.
Member Liebolt,
Yes.
and Chair Bergman.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, we have 2 landmarks in one night. Thank you,
So
all of you.
exciting.
Thank you, Mr. Hugel. Okay,
Can I just ask a question?
thanks to,
Are you, how familiar are you with the children's home or the orphanage? I know you study your home a lot, but that was such a significant part of the village, and she was instrumental in stuff.
Not that familiar, I mean, obviously, I've read what's in the library, or in the museum. And,
Uh-huh.
what was interesting to me is, they had 4 children, I don't know if it was, Ray Moreland. who told me, or
Yeah, did you see the video?
That they had, all of their children passed away at a young age, so I think that's why they built the orphanage.
Right. 3 of them.
one of the buildings, it was, I think the first building was named after the first daughter, who I don't think was more than a year old when she died. And so the first daughter died at age 1 or 1.5 or something like that. And then,
We found some photographs that we did not include because it was later than this time period. Found some photographs that I shared with Paul, and we shared with the Historical Society, but they're photographs of the kids at the orphanages, and there are, at the orphanages, excuse me, in some of the buildings, and you can see buildings in the rear, and the people at the historical society were thrilled because some of those images they've never seen before. But, you know, a lot of kids, they're happy, they're well clothed.
Yes.
Well-fed.
Yeah, yeah,
Well taken care of, yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
It occupied a whole block during
They
its,
donated 2 of those buildings.
yeah. So you have a home from a pretty incredible couple. It's very touching to hear you talk about your love of the house. And
Yeah, I think it's great, just wonderful. So, all right, so I don't have much of a commissioner's report beyond that. other
Thank
than
you.
Other than to thank everybody for participating tonight. Claire, do you have is there a staff report of any sort?
Not really tonight.
Okay.
Goalie and hockey guy, whatever else I have. It starts at 8:30. so-
Okay,
You got
good luck.
10 minutes.
See ya, all right. So, we don't have much of a commissioner's report. Claire has said, doesn't have much of a staff report. So, any other business, any other comments officially on the record? No? Then I will entertain a motion to close the meeting.
I second it.
Okay? So we have a meeting, and I think we're adjourned.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you, great meeting.
Good.
Okay,
Bring some more on like this, Paul.
yeah, well, we have to talk to